The plenary discussion is the role of governments promoting sustainable development goals. And we're going to have the moderator of this particular plenary session is Trelynd Bradley, goes by Trey. He is the Deputy Director of Sustainable Freight and Supply Chain Management with the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, otherwise known as GoBiz. I can also, if it's okay, Trey, I can also just say who the other panelists are going to be, and then you can talk about them as well, or give an overview of what they're involved in. Henriksen is from the as a General Consul of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They were kind enough last night to put on the reception, of which we are still grateful today. And then we have Megan Hyndman, who is the Climate and Environmental Technology Team Lead at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So I would like to invite those three folks up on the stage today.
Is this on? Hello, can everyone hear me? Great, I think I can hear an echo, so we're good. Good morning, everyone, how are you? Very opportune time to be talking about this subject, and I actually love the piece in that last about data. We've been thinking a lot about that at the state government lately. We're about to roll out $30 million in funds to our 5 containerized ports to provide data visibility to reduce emissions here in California. But I think that jumps right into kind of what we're going to be talking about here in this panel, which is what is the role that government plays in promoting sustainable development goals and also working to implement them. So I think the next piece about execution is really important and timely at this time. Just a little bit of background, my name is Trelynd Bradley. I'm the Deputy Director of Sustainable Freight and Supply Chain Development. Work across California, our 12 ports, including here with the Port of San Diego, in helping them implement a lot of funds that we are investing in supply chain. We're making the largest investment as a state of California in supply chain that we ever have, just given the crisis, but also the need to transition the supply chain to a cleaner future. And I don't think there's any folks here from maybe neighboring states, but just to give you a perspective on how much we are investing just alone in zero-emission vehicle technologies over the next 3 years, north of $11 billion, which is more than the entire budgets of some nearby states. Just to give you just the scope of how much we are putting into the climate transition, it is a lot of funds just because we realize we have huge goals. Yesterday at the California Air Resources Board, they released some of our plans for 2045. Which we have to, meet in reducing emissions. And then, we also have different goals like every new vehicle to be a zero-emission vehicle in 2035 and others. So I think that's just kind of something that we're doing a little bit on the California side, but I really want to hear from the panelists here because I know that there's a lot going on, especially with research across the board on the Norwegian side. And then also at the ITA with working with businesses across the nation. So I'm actually going to start off with Gry and talk about maybe a little bit about what you're working on and mentioning with ocean research and green shipping corridors and the likes.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. I've really enjoyed attending this conference so far. I learned a lot from the presentations yesterday, and the conversation. So thanks for putting that up, Matt and Michael and everyone else. So I represent Norway in California, and we work a lot on sustainable development goals. And it's a good place to be to work on finding good technology to help solve our global challenges. But I'm going to focus on the ocean here. The ocean plays an essential and too often an unrecognized role in our lives. Norway is a relatively small country, but we're a big ocean state in terms of our maritime industries, our ocean research, and our rich maritime history. And that is why the Norwegian government has taken on a particular role in promoting healthy ocean management globally. This is about Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water, but it's also about many of the other SDGs, such as SDG 2, food security, SDG 12, zero hunger, SDG 13, climate action, etc. And this year is called the Super Year of the Ocean due to all the many conferences and processes addressing ocean-related issues. And we've seen several important breakthroughs this year, such as the decision to, at the UN Environmental Assembly, to launch negotiations for a global treaty against plastic pollution, and the temporary decision at the WTO Ministerial Conference to curb fisheries subsidies. We also hope that they will be able to conclude the BBNJ negotiations in the beginning of next year, delivering important targets under SDG 14. And this also demonstrates an increasing consensus about the dire environmental status of the ocean and the need to protect it better, and not least how we can use the ocean more sustainably. And because we're currently facing double challenge, on the one hand, saving the world's marine ecosystems, on the other, increasing the ocean's productivity. And you could say it's even a triple challenge because considering climate change and our need to accelerate the green transition. A sustainable ocean economy is crucial to forge a sustainable development of the planet. Let me mention a few but significant examples. First, ocean-based climate solutions such as offshore wind, green shipping, and blue carbon can contribute significantly to taking emissions down to zero by 2050. Second, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture can deliver safe and nutritious food of crucial importance for global food security and with less of a climate footprint. And third, coastal and ocean-based tourism can produce services that help restore and protect the ocean while delivering jobs and prosperity. So we need to secure the coexistence of different uses of the ocean without sacrificing itself. Existing industries need to develop in a sustainable manner, and we need to create a foundation for new and emerging industries, not only on a national level, but also on a regional and global level. And that is why Norway and Palau took the initiative to co-chair the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. The Ocean Panel, now comprising 17 heads of government, including the US and most of the sort of important ocean states, has a bold ocean agenda. The panel members commit themselves to sustainably manage 100% of national waters by 2025. And we encourage all other ocean states to do the same by 2030. And we also encourage investment in international science cooperation. Therefore, the decade of ocean science is very timely. Knowledge is the key to finding solutions to the threats of ocean health. So I think that your introduction this morning, it was very, very important. And we need to implement these solutions through working together on a common platform to manage and protect the oceans better. The private sector has a vital responsibility to contribute to a sustainable ocean economy. In fact, reaching our goals is not possible without the active contribution from the industry. The panel yesterday morning discussed how governments can best support industry in this endeavor, and Norway is a committed partner with our industry. The Norwegian government has ambitious goals for offshore wind. We recently launched a major offshore wind initiative with a target to open areas for production that will generate 30 gigawatts by 2040. That's equivalent, more or less equivalent to what we're producing in total right now. And it's also quite similar to the California goal of producing or generating 25 gigawatts by 2045. And a large part of the Norwegian sea areas is only suitable for floating technology, due to the sea depth, and this is another similarity we have with California. So floating offshore wind is an immature technology, and technology development and cost reductions are necessary to achieve competitiveness. And as a nation, we have extensive experience with developing large industrial projects at sea and energy production on land. The world's first floating turbine Hywind demo was installed in 2009. Building on this experience, we're now supporting Equinor and its partners in developing Hywind Tampen. And this is, as of today, the largest floating wind farm under development with a system capacity of 88 megawatts. And it will provide electricity to the oil and gas fields on the Norwegian continental shelf. And actually, the first turbine was set in motion this Sunday. Norway holds a leading position in transitioning the maritime transport sector to low and zero emission propulsion. Several policy instruments are in place to make our maritime transport sector greener, including taxing emissions on CO2 and NOx, and supporting research and development through loans and grants. And Norway is also planning to set requirements for low and zero emission in segments such as car ferries, high-speed passenger vessels, vessels in aquaculture, and offshore. And the number of electric-powered ferries in Norway is growing, and it's currently representing 42% of all our ferries in domestic traffic. And we will scale up our actions at home as well as globally. So, couple of words on maritime security in light of the dramatically changed security policy situation in Europe, and not least the leaks from the gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Our awareness of maritime security has increased. There is close cooperation between various maritime authorities in the region, including in the field of preparedness against acute pollution and maritime safety. And I'm sure that strengthening the information sharing across national borders as a basis for better maritime situational overview and preparedness will be on the agenda in the time to come. Private initiatives have an important role to play in the development of emerging technologies and in the application of science and technology for the oceans in the global public interest. I will stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
You said a few things. First of all, offshore wind, we have to deploy a lot of that in California. We're in very early stages. I don't know if anyone has been talking a lot about offshore wind lately, but for example, we are having a deep water port study going on for $1 million in San Luis Obispo. We have 45 million, and we've been actually working very closely with private companies on the Norwegian side, especially up in Humboldt area with like Nordic aqua farms and aquaculture and offshore wind deployment. I mean, it's really an opportune time across the space. I also mentioned maritime security. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. Our ports here in California faced the largest cyber attacks this last year, all predominantly coming from Russia in that area of the world, but just a cluster of them, especially over the summer, was very daunting. You're cross-cutting a lot of different areas, but I'm thinking like offshore wind, I really need to get my first offshore wind turbine up in California, so I can say the same you just said on Sunday. So maybe turn it over here, just talk about the ITA and the goals that you all have, and then what you're working on with businesses in the climate front.
Yeah, thanks so much. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Matt and the TMA team for putting this together. My name is Megan Hyndman. I work with the International Trade Administration, or ITA, with the U.S. Department of Commerce. And my particular role is working with our Office of Energy and Environmental Industries. So I work closely with companies working in the field of environmental technologies and climate, and supporting U.S. exports and U.S. competitiveness in those sectors. And of course, there's a lot of overlap with the BlueTech economy. So it's been really great to be part of the events this week and see all of the innovations that companies are advancing in this field, and seeing how we at ITA can help support those efforts. So for those of you who may not be familiar already with ITA, we are a trade agency. We promote U.S. exports and support U.S. companies and American workers. We provide a whole range of export assistance services to do that. from trade counseling to market intelligence. We host a lot of different kinds of trade events, trade shows, trade missions. We bring foreign delegations here to the United States to meet with U.S. companies and gain exposure to U.S. technologies and solutions. So there are a lot of ways that U.S. companies can be plugged into our efforts. In terms of the topic of today's discussion, where does ITA fit in when it comes to sustainable development and climate? I'll say a few points on that. We feel very strongly that international trade is a positive force for economic development. I think that's no surprise there. But we also feel it's very important for sustainable economic development as well. It's really hard to envision some of our trading partners being able to develop in a sustainable manner without having access to the innovations and the technologies, many of which we've seen here this week, that can help mitigate some of the negative environmental and climate impacts of rapid economic growth and rapid industrialization. So it's really at that sweet spot where I feel that we can have a big impact. We're very positive in the role that U.S. companies can play in that space as well, as we roll out innovations here in the U.S. and drive down costs. We're really excited about the opportunities to increase access to these technologies abroad as well, and to many of our foreign partners who really have a need for them. So, I'll go ahead and make maybe give a few examples here of how ITA is specifically working in the climate and sustainable development space, and then happy to go into more detail in our discussion. One key activity that we've been rolling out over the past year and a half is our U.S. clean tech export competitiveness strategy. So I'm sorry, I know that's a mouthful. This is a strategy that we announced about a year and a half ago. We're in the process of developing this strategy. What we want to do is chart a path to enhance U.S. export competitiveness in clean technologies. And that's a fairly broad category that covers a lot of technologies and solutions in the climate mitigation space. And I see a real role for blue economy solutions as well to fit in there. So that strategy is still under development. We hope to, we've engaged in extensive outreach and stakeholder sessions with industry over the past year and a half to inform our strategy, and we hope to have some good news on that soon as we roll that out in the coming months. But in the meantime, we are looking at ways to align our efforts at ITA, our trade promotion efforts, with climate and clean tech objectives. So I mentioned, that we host a lot of different kinds of trade programs, trade shows, delegations, trade missions. So we're really ramping up our efforts to integrate climate and clean tech considerations in these programs. I think one great example that some of you may be familiar with is the Discover Global Markets event that we held in Rhode Island a few months ago, focused on the blue economy. I've talked with several companies over this week who were able to participate in that event. We had over 300 industry stakeholders, as well as foreign delegates and buyer delegations from over 20 markets abroad, attending that event and talking about potential business opportunities. We're very happy to have heard this week of a few export successes that have already resulted from that event. So that's exactly the type of activity that that we're supporting at ITA, and that we look forward to ramping up going forward to support both our climate and clean tech efforts and blue tech exporters as well. The other brief example that I'll give is, all of the great work that we've been doing with the TMA BlueTech team to specifically support small and medium-sized businesses in the blue tech sector. So our partnership with TMA BlueTech is a longstanding partnership going back to 2016 through our what's called our Market Development Cooperator Program, MDCP. apologies, we like our acronyms with the federal government. So through our MDCP program, we've been working with TMA BlueTech to organize joint activities and underwrite the costs for small and medium-sized businesses to participate in international trade shows and other types of activities to gain awareness of export markets abroad and where there are opportunities for to export their goods and services. And so we've had a lot of great successes from that program. We estimate we've facilitated over 26 million in U.S. exports in BlueTech solutions, which is great. And I'm very happy to announce that just as of a few months ago, we've renewed our partnership with TMA BlueTech through this program. And so over the next 3 years, we'll be looking at rolling out additional activities in support of BlueTech companies. So just wanted to put that plug out there for any companies in the room that might be interested in getting involved. Please stay tuned. We hope to have more news in that in the coming months. So I'll go ahead and stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. I just want to say I completely agree on the elevating small and medium-sized businesses for export capacity. I know we have like the STEP program in California, being able to get that access, especially in an emerging space like this, emerging industry. Small and medium businesses face so many challenges in trying to elevate themselves into the global market. I applaud the work. I think it's absolutely critical at this time. And so I guess to bring it back to a little bit about our panel and how we are promoting sustainable development goals from a government perspective, I want to ask you, I know that we have COP27 right now, and there's a lot going on in the green shipping space. Maybe you can speak to how governments can work together to promote an agenda for sustainable use of the oceans, and maybe give an example that's fairly recent, I think, for us.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, during COP27, I think last week, there was an initiative by Norway and US jointly called the Green Shipping Challenge. It was launched by climate envoy John Kerry and Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre. And the idea is to give a signal that we need to speed up the transition to green shipping. And it's adding on to the IMO negotiations to set more ambitious goals for emission reduction in maritime transport. And so Norway has national and international ambitions in trying to be part of that speeding up electrification and more green fuels such as ammonium. So that was last week. I think doing that jointly, on the international stage and setting the stage at COP27 to also set a spotlight on the ocean management and oceans. It's an important step.
Very timely, considering that industry just had probably the highest amount of demand, I believe, that they have ever had. If anyone, folks here in the shipping industry, it was a very good couple of years from an economic perspective and on the books. So as I say in California, we're investing the largest amount in supply chain. If there's anyone from the maritime industry, I know it's a very great couple of years. We would love to match our funds with your private dollars to make the transition to the clean economy for shipping as well. But it's a very timely point and decision to be made, just because the intersection of international shipping is just so, it's so cross-cutting between different governments. It takes really concerted effort to work with those companies to really set the stage. Megan, I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe kind of what are, how, I think kind of talked about some of the programs with, for exporting and interfacing with ITA and kind of from a climate perspective, but maybe, what are some other ways that kind of maybe businesses, maybe they're international or for folks in the room who are tied to businesses, how can they get more involved in U.S. government climate initiatives?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. That's a great question. So I talked a bit about the services that we provide for U.S. exporters here, and certainly that would be one part of my answer. Is again, we believe that U.S. companies really can be part of the solution when it comes to enhancing sustainable development goals and climate goals abroad. And so taking advantage, if your company is interested in looking at export markets abroad, being in touch with us and taking advantage of our trade counseling services, our business matchmaking services, some of the programs that we put on, that's a real great way to start along that path and make the connections that are needed. I know there's a number of foreign companies in the room too. We do work with foreign companies as well. An important piece of the work that we do is on the inward investment promotion side. So working with foreign investors and those interested in supporting the U.S. clean tech economy, helping to facilitate those opportunities. So and we're very much focused on building out clean technology supply chains in the U.S. And so I think foreign investment has an important role to play there. I did touch a bit on my remarks about the importance of the private sector taking a leading role in these efforts, and so that's something I think I would hit on a bit more as well. There's a lot of great announcements that have been coming out of COP27 and previous climate conferences. I think the green shipping challenge that Gree mentioned is one perfect example of that. There's also there was a contact on one of the previous panels yesterday, I believe, who talked about the First Movers Coalition. That's a great opportunity for companies that want to help move the needle on climate ambitions and help to green, their supply chains and send a signal to the market that, we really need to clean up, especially some of these heavy industry sectors that are hard to abate in terms of emissions. So steel, aluminum, chemicals. So that's I think a great opportunity for companies to take a leading role. And then one last thing I would note is that as U.S. government, we really rely on our industry partners to be engaged and to offer us feedback and input on how we can best shape our programs and our policies to support your efforts. Especially here at the Department of Commerce, we have a number of, just to give an example of federal advisory committees, trade advisory committees, where U.S. companies can have a role in informing U.S. government policy and making sure that the programs that we're rolling out meet your objectives, facilitate opportunities for U.S. companies, that we're focused on the right challenges that you're facing. There is a big trade policy component of the work that we do at ITA, so working with foreign government partners and helping to remove barriers to trade in clean technologies and other sectors as well. So it's very critical to have that input from U.S. industry to make sure that we're focusing on the right priorities. And one actually quick plug I would make for my colleagues at NOAA, I think this is a perfect example of where we need industry input. One of the panelists yesterday talked about the climate ocean strategy that they currently have out for on the Federal Register for companies to and other stakeholders to provide input. So I think that's taking advantage of these opportunities when they come up to make sure that your voice is heard and that the U.S. government's really focusing on the priorities that we should be focusing on to support U.S. industry and other stakeholders that that we represent.
Thank you. I think one thing I want to touch upon, and maybe that you just said, then I want to expand upon and then ask you each a question about, but you kind of talked about how government interfaces in supporting and building domestic supply chains that are green here. We've been thinking about that a lot in California. I know that we're here on the coast in San Diego County, but across the county, over in Imperial County, we have one of the world's largest supplies of lithium below the Salton Sea, combined with brine that will be extracted in geothermal. Up in the high desert above, we have the only operating rare earth facility in the Western Hemisphere, actually here in California, now providing 15% of the world's rare earth supply. Rare earths are in everything. They're in this, they're in the phones in your hand, they are in the camera that is back there in the back. And then we have several operations in lithium, also in the high desert, and boron, which is important for boron carbide, semiconductors, and the likes. One supply chain I think that here in California we've been focused on is that one. Governor Newsom joined President Biden on the stage. It was only California that was on that stage this February to highlight critical mineral supply chain. And our opportunity as California to not only lead in that space, but then to work with international partners who may be lacking some of those resources, because they will need them too to make that transition. I don't have a graph in front of me about what the demand of critical materials would, but if I had a graph here, I would be like shooting my finger like all the way up in the sky, because that is how much the demand is going to be for things like nickel, cobalt, lithium, rare earths, boron, and the likes. So maybe that's one thing I kind of want to maybe touch upon. I know that you mentioned a little bit earlier about with the work and kind of thinking about, you know, the ecosystem of the blue economy. What is one maybe supply chain that you all are hyper focused on in Norway from a, you know, a green perspective?
My colleague Martin talked a little bit about the Green Industrial Initiative that the government launched last year. So we have sort of focused on a few industries that will be important in the green transition. So offshore wind is one of them. Batteries is another. And hydrogen, CCUS. And we have actually, on CCUS, we have a sort of a big project that sort of covers the whole value chain from carbon capture, transportation and storage under the seabed in the North Sea, where we have pumped up oil, and we can pump down some CO2, and it's safely stored there for eternity. So that's one large area that we're looking at. Yeah.
Same question. I totally agree that that's such an incredibly important topic right now. We're seeing so much interest within ITA on supply chains, and we're working to build out our expertise and our focus on this. We actually just came out with a report fairly recently on specific sectors that we're focusing on in the supply chain. Not all of them are green tech relevant, but a lot of them are. I think critical minerals is and batteries. Those are definitely two areas that we're very focused on. There's a few others as well. My office covers the energy side as well as environmental technology. So there's quite a lot of discussions on supply chain happening, on that front, on renewable energy and things like that. So yeah, I think we're very much aligned to some of the sectors that you all have mentioned as well.
It's good for the environment, because I think I've been using the word hyper-local supply chain. Hyper-local is the one I've wanted to be using for years now, because I think the supply chain is so vast. And from an emissions perspective, we're talking about greening the maritime industry. If you have to transport lithium multiple times around the world, it's not really the benefit to the earth or the climate. So I wanted to, reach out to the audience if there was any specific questions. I know that we have a mic here, and I know Matt, if that's okay, but I do think we have a lot of information here cross-cutting. Is there anyone who has questions from the audience, or maybe points to share with our panelists here today?
I've always got a question.
Yes, there we go.
I'm Michael Jones. When we talk about green shipping, and we're going to have a panel later on autonomy. And certainly with Tesla and other things here on the land side, there's a lot of autonomy being done. I'd love for you to talk about the importance and role of autonomy in shipping as to the green shipping. And from what's being done nationally and certainly in the state of California, I don't think there's any efforts to promote autonomy on the shipping side. And when we've been to GoBiz in the past, it's been primarily focused on ports. So I'd love to hear from you, so in addition to green shipping, what is the focus of GoBiz now more in the ocean? Autonomy and robotics and things like that. That'd be great.
You know, I actually have not spent as much time thinking about this. Great question. I think from a California perspective, on the autonomy space, we've spoken a lot. We as GoBiz, you know, for those who are maybe familiar from California, our bread and butter really is service to businesses, entrepreneurs, and innovators. And that's helping them navigate incentives, having them understand the landscape of perhaps venture capital in California, having them, you know, connect with folks if they're dealing with export or import or foreign direct investment, to make sure that their projects are a success. There's a lot of companies, particularly within the Bay Area, that have done a lot of advancements in autonomous technology, not only, you know, to personal vehicles, but also to aircraft as well. I don't believe, and I have met one company actually in the Orange County area who is creating an autonomous technology with kind of submarines. Very interesting company. You know, our ability, I think, as California to regulate beyond the coastline has always been challenged, which is our ability, our connection with the ocean carriers. And, you know, we really have been, especially in the past year, looking to the Federal Maritime Commission related to a lot of the regulations that they were able to levy. But at the same time, I believe that you're completely correct. It makes a lot of sense from an emissions reduction standpoint. But you know, if there are companies, we're here to help them succeed. The one thing that we do have, of which autonomous shipping could definitely play a role in, is if there are technologies that or infrastructure that is needed at the ports to facilitate them to make that technology more applicable. I think inside the terminal, as most know in California, is sometimes a little bit more of a challenge with autonomous technologies. But for engaging the ports, we have 1.2 billion out right now for bid across California's ports for infrastructure. And then our office, we will be giving 30 million for data systems and data system integration, which, you know, companies, the ports will be able to partner with companies, shipping companies, and those who may have, you know, those early applications of technology to be able to make that transition. But it's definitely a very interesting topic to think about. I don't know, autonomous shipping.
I'm not an expert, but I can say that Norway is really working hard on autonomous shipping. There are some of the bigger companies in shipping and in logistics that are developing autonomous vessels for sort of handling the Norwegian coast. So there are some interesting developments, and I don't really know the details. My colleague Martin, you can talk to him during the break. He is a maritime expert, so.
Also not an expert here, but I would say that, you know, to the extent that autonomous shipping can advance green, you know, climate goals and sustainability goals, that certainly, you know, is a promising sector that we're willing to support, and, you know, putting on the international lens, happy to work with companies and stakeholders to determine where are there opportunities for those kinds of products abroad.
Great. Any other questions from folks out there for our panel here today? Well, I think we have a little bit more time. Is there anything else that you all wanted to additionally cover?
Maybe I could say a little bit about how we cooperate, because I talked a lot about international cooperation, and to bring it down one level to Norway and California.
Yes.
Because we have a climate agreement between the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment and the California Environmental Protection Agency that covers sort of all climate action, and we share best practices with each other. We share our goals and discuss how we go about reaching them, and so that sort of creates a dialogue and a framework for us to work with California also on the business side, creating opportunities to sort of exchange ideas about how things can be done. And we also have an MOU between Innovation Norway, which is, I guess, the Norway equivalent of GoBiz and GoBiz, and that's sort of more business to business commercial opportunities for collaboration. And I think that's these are pieces of paper, but they're important in sort of setting a framework under which we can cooperate and our industries can collaborate and find solutions together, which is, I think, what we need to solve the great challenges.
I think that just one thing I want to talk about is like kind of the business-to-business application is, I think, very important. We're talking about roles that government can play. I think sometimes government is a little bit hesitant to play the connector of business to business, probably for, you know, preferential reasons. But I think in the climate space, we're in a little bit of a different time where it's almost essential. We have the time is ticking. And however we can facilitate those, I think, is really important. I think ITA, you know, you're mentioning a lot with the clean tech export competitiveness strategy and other the likes, like that is kind of more of your wheelhouse. So maybe share a little bit about on that as well.
Sure. Yeah. So you know, helping to facilitate the business-to-business matchmaking, that's really our bread and butter, and you know what we hope to you know, welcome companies to reach out to us if they're interested in that. In terms of the clean tech export competitiveness strategy, you know, as I mentioned, that's the strategy is under development. We're hoping to release it soon, and we'll definitely be in touch with stakeholders once we have news on that. But in the meantime, we are, you know, aligning a lot of our traditional services and programs to support climate and clean tech exporters. I already talked about a lot of the trade promotion programs. We're doing trade shows, trade events, bringing foreign delegations in these sectors over. I also touched on the investment promotion side of what we do. So working with, you know, foreign investors who are interested in building out clean, you know, clean technology supply chains here in the U.S. So that's something we're, you know, continuing to ramp up. We also, I did not touch so much on the trade policy side of what we do, so wanted to mention that quickly here. You know, for industry stakeholders who are engaging in procurement, you know, interested in participating in foreign government procurements abroad, we have an advocacy center that supports companies in those efforts, and we're, you know, enhancing again our focus on climate and clean technology, you know, foreign government projects in those areas. And so welcome companies to be in touch with us, especially early in the process if you're looking at those kinds of opportunities. And also, again, you know, going back to what I stated earlier on the trade policy side, working a lot with foreign government partners and, you know, in our multilateral and bilateral engagements to, you know, make sure we're talking about climate and clean tech exports and how to facilitate trade in those areas. So if there are trade barriers that, you know, industry is facing, we talked a bit in some of the panels yesterday about the importance of harmonizing international standards about intellectual property rights protection and enforcement. So things like that, that's really where, you know, we want to hear that feedback from industry to make sure that we're raising these issues. And the last point I would make is want to make sure to highlight that, you know, there are a lot of folks at ITA in our headquarters office, like myself in DC, but we also have offices across the United States, actually over 100 offices across the United States, and we have quite a number of offices here in California, and my colleague here, JQ, is with our San Diego office. So definitely welcome you and would recommend that you get in touch with our local offices as your first entry point to engaging with ITA and kind of understanding where you can be plugged into our network. And we also work very closely with our other U.S. government trade agencies, so Export-Import Bank, U.S. Trade and Development Agency, others as well. And my colleague with the Export-Import Bank is here this week as well. So just wanted to highlight that, you know, come talk to Sandra if you have any questions for XM. So yeah, wanted to make sure to let folks know about the resources that are available here locally as well.
And actually, that actually leads to another question I have, because I think that's one thing that we all have realized in working with international companies. They often are interested in coming to the United States or coming to California or dealing and working in some certain space, and they're always asking, where do I start? Where do I begin? Maybe to flip on that, maybe with Norwegian companies and, you know, them coming to California or the US, what are kind of maybe the first pieces of advice you give in navigating the U.S. economy and the U.S. government ecosystem?
So I think that's where Innovation Norway comes in. the sort of the foreign service representation and Innovation Norway, we work very closely together in the US. My colleague Alex over here is our representative in San Francisco, and they receive Norwegian companies that are, especially like smaller companies that need more help setting up business, and they can give advice. They can also refer to GoBiz when that is the natural thing to do, getting in touch with investors and just good advice on how to sort of figure out the bigger picture here. So that's a really important part of our setup here.
What would you be first kind of advice coming over to the U.S., company investing here, clean tech? Where would you push them to navigate from the economy perspective, government perspective, at the federal level?
Yeah, sure. So we actually have, diving a little bit more deeply into what I mentioned on the inward investment promotion side, we have an office with ITA called Select USA. They are, a great resource for companies looking to establish a presence here in the United States or wanting to enhance their investments. They, provide guidance on navigating, the regulatory atmosphere, and can put foreign investors in touch with economic development organizations and other state-based organizations that can provide information on specific investment opportunities in their state. So they're a really great resource to take advantage of. We do also host an annual Select USA Investment Summit where we bring hundreds of foreign investors from across the globe to Washington, D.C. each year. It's usually held in June. And so that's a great venue for foreign investors to meet with economic development organizations across the United States and get a better idea of what opportunities are available.
Maybe I should also add on that we have an Invest in Norway person at the San Francisco Innovation Norway office. And so for those US businesses who are interested in establishing themselves in Norway, we also help with that.
I'm glad you also mentioned Select USA. That's exactly what I was thinking as well. And the piece that you made about being the conduit to local economic development in the United States, like I know we had another panelist, but I just want to emphasize how essential local government is to implementation, especially within the US. The system is designed in such a way where local governance is very dominant in a lot of ways of permitting, and our ports, right? Our ports are run by local agencies, as maybe compared to other nations of the world where they're nationalized assets, because the local agencies do have that more real perspective on the ground of what are the diverse needs of not only the community nearby, but what are the assets that they're able to leverage locally to be able to support projects. I think that, and I've always thought about this too, the climate transition, the reaching the clean economy, it will happen at the local level. Like that is where implementation and execution takes place. Was really glad that you mentioned that as well. I did want to kind of do a lightning round type question, and then we'll ask if anyone has any other questions from the group, and then maybe we'll do closing, and then get everybody in for the networking break. And he does have a question. Go ahead now. Yeah, we'll do questions now if there's any other additional questions. Yes.
Greg Murphy with Blue Economy Strategies. I wanted to come back to a point that Megan made. It's a huge announcement that the Department of Commerce through ITA is reinvesting in the BlueTech Trade Export Initiative with TMA BlueTech. I know that was a hugely impactful program before. So just curious, maybe it's a good question for Matt. Just curious, what's the areas of focus for the next program and geographic areas of focus?
Yeah, I think that's something that's to be determined. We're really excited to enter this next phase of the program. So to provide a little bit more context of what we did before, we identified several international trade shows. We held a trade mission as well to support BlueTech exporters in this space. And so that's exactly what we're in the process of talking about going forward. What trade events do we want to focus on? So please stay tuned on that. But yeah, we're super excited and looking forward to having great engagement from BlueTech companies.
No, I was probably going to ask him something.
I'm coming up to do a shameless plug.
Do a plug.
So my name is Diana Dominguez. I'm Trey's colleague, and I sit on the International Affairs and Trade team at GOBIZ in Sacramento. And so my shameless plug to add to the discussion around the support for exporters is we're actually in the process of considering a trade mission to Baja California Sur. Our counterparts in Baja California Sur have identified the blue economy as a priority for their economic strategy, and they have asked us for support in adopting some of our best practices and bringing down private sector to showcase the innovative technologies. So there's sales opportunities in that. I will say that much of the work that we do does benefit from the work that ITA does with the market research and the boots on the ground that they have there. So we look forward to reaching out to your office to partner some more. But for companies that are interested in the Mexican market, in particular the Baja region, feel free to come up to me. I'll be here all day and happy to share my information with you. So thank you.
Seems like there's nothing but serendipitous timing. That was kind of along the question I was going to ask, because I had spoken with Diana earlier. She had mentioned this trade mission. And so I was going to ask you, Trey, if we were just to envision what that could look like, on the supply chain, from the supply chain perspective, and sustainable development goals, like if you personally, on behalf of the governor or the governor's office, or just you personally, like how would you envision that to look? And how could it advance over time? I know it's an abstract question, but it's more about what it could look like for the future.
That's a great question. I actually say that all the time, is that we're building the supply chain for the future. I think it's to talk about all across the supply chain. We just have humongous mandates at the state level relative to the transition, for example, drayage trucks, which there are thousands and thousands in California, which facilitate with the ports, will all need to be zero emission in several years. And on top of that, we also have huge requirements for our ports, but the ports are actually, leading much of the charge. They're having the one-on-ones with communities near them who have, shown great appreciation for port leadership and trying to undo a lot of the wrongs from an environmental justice perspective have happened over decades, and making that transition. All these ports have committed to being zero emission in some fashion through their boards or through their directors. And it's very incredible when you go to see on the ground in the ports what is happening. It is completely changing. It's a revolution in port infrastructure at this time, and it's going to look very different in 30, 40, and 50 years. And it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of transmission power. It's going to take a lot of electricity. It's going to take a lot of critical minerals. But I think that's what's the exciting piece that we have going on in California, is that not only do we have these large mandates relative to supply chain and making this transition, we're equally developing the supply chains that will then foster that transition. And I think that that is so critical to be talking about. It's why I spend a lot of time working on how are we going to get 100-ton, green hydrogen plant here within, 2 hours of Southern California. How are we going to, access all of the lithium, rare earth, and boron resources to be able to fuel all these vehicles that we will need, and we do it here in California. Build the long-term runway and all of these supply chains that will support this transition, that will make places like our ports, our warehouses, our rail systems look completely different. I also want to say one recent announcement that we did have that's very exciting for California was we had a recent announcement from BNSF for a $1.5 billion investment by BNSF, the first inland type port multimodal electrified inland port project. First inland port project period ever led solely by a Class 1 railroad, announced up in Barstow, not far from here, up in our high desert. But you have these large commitments from the private sector equally that are committed to making these investments, new investments that are aligned with the goals that California has set, and that I think that many of the communities around where these companies and where this activity will be appreciative of. I'll just also say that we, and I, mentioning the comment with Mexico, is that we have a new land border entry that is at Otay Mesa that is opening up right now. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for engagement via supply chain there also. There's we have a lot of geothermal activity in California, but there is a lot right across the border. There's also critical materials. There's the port there as well. I think that we're having a very integrated system for supply chain. And one thing I'll last talk about is data. Data is very critical for supply chain, and it's been very fascinating going through the space of ports because it is very different from port to port, but that is changing dramatically. There's countries like Singapore, Rotterdam, and the Netherlands who have done really fascinating stuff with data and building digital twins to be able to scenario model different things that are coming with increase in supply chain volume, emissions reductions and patterns at the port. We here even have folks at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA, doing things like mapping shipping corridors and emissions to be able to see where the densest places of emissions that are happening when we're facilitating trade, for example, with Asia. Because the containers will only increase. Every statistic will only say by 2040, even here at our ports, we will double in containers. Containerization is happening, and it presents a huge opportunity from a data perspective to be able to track each of those containers and understand where the different point pieces where we can lower emission profiles and make the supply chain more efficient. So I think the data piece is going to be huge in the coming years as well. Any other questions from folks? And I think I had an idea of like a lightning round of kind of, because we're now, it's just kind of, we're here at the end of the year. I know we're coming up on the holidays. I've seen a few Christmas trees already out in environments in San Diego. So, but we're obviously going into 2023. And so I just wanted to ask maybe one or two words of what are you focused on relative to promoting sustainability from a government perspective in this next year? What are one or two words maybe to think about that year to sum up what you're focused on in this space?
So I think I talked a lot about what the Norwegian government is doing, sort of on the broader perspective. But we are very focused on offshore wind. We're very focused on green shipping. Those are like the two, I think, main, especially here in the US. That's our main focus of work.
I think for me, given my specific role in the environmental technology side of our office, really looking at how we can elevate the focus on technologies in water, air, and waste, and incorporate those into a lot of the attention we're seeing on climate, and both in mitigation and adaptation.
Any other closing thoughts, statements from our panelists?
I just would say, I know I gave quite a pitch about ITA through my remarks today, but please do feel free to reach out to myself or the colleagues in the room from ITA. We're more than happy to talk with you if you're interested in being plugged into our network and our activities.
So I'll just say the same for our part. We're a small team Norway here from the embassy in Washington, D.C., Innovation Norway, and the Consul General. We're happy to talk to any of you who might have some more detailed questions that I haven't been able to answer from up here. Thank you.
Thanks, fantastic. Well, I learned a lot. Well, thank our panelists, everybody. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.